Welcome to another episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dusick. I was the founding drummer of Maroon 5, and I'm now a registered therapist, author, and mental health advocate. With me, as always, is Duck Maillard. How you doing, Duck?
Good, buddy. I always feel like I should have some suffixes too, like I said. So you are the founding drummer of Maroon 5 and, therapist and all that. And I cleaned up oranges in my yard yesterday because they all fall out of the trees. So yeah, I got oranges. That's the humble brag.
I got oranges. That's your bio.
that was the name of my album of my band. We got oranges. Yeah. How you doing this week?
I'm doing pretty well. It's interesting how this whole project is kind of taken off now, and we've got guests booked and scheduling.
It's
all
real.
This stuff. It's real, and I'm finding that for me, having a project, there's a discernible change that happens in me when I have something and it becomes real like that, where all of a sudden I go, "Oh yeah,
yeah."
I like having
your emails become 10 pages instead of 5.
Tell me what that experience is for you, because you're on the receiving end now of my obsessive compulsive type A personality. So what's that like?
It's interesting because I have 10% of that. Like I'm the same way in that I write thorough emails, but I'll write one and I'll be done. Like you write one and then an hour later you're like, I had additional thoughts and here's another thing. So I'm not put out by it. I'm not like, oh God, another one. Check in with me in a year after we've been doing this for a long time.
Right.
But no, I think it's great because it allows me to not have to do any prep work. You do all the prep work. You write, give me cheat sheets and bios on the guests. But also it's reassuring to know that you're a part of a project with someone who cares about it as much as you do. You know what I mean? If this was fly by night and it was like, I will just wing it, I think A, it would show up in the product, but B, it would be a little daunting for me to be like, well, how much do I have to lift here? If I'm going to do something, I'm going to do 110%. And if you were only doing 50%, I'd be like, well, why am I doing the heavy lifting for your project? You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's reassuring to me. It's not, don't worry about it. Continue sending me 10-page emails. It's all good.
Was I that way when I was producing your band?
Yes.
I was.
Yes, you were. You would send us mixes and then I have an idea for this. And
yeah.
Constant mixes.
And they weren't even mixes. They were rough mixes.
Well, we didn't know what we didn't know back then.
Yeah. Well, do you know what was interesting about that whole process for me was that it was the first time that I really kind of invested myself in a creative process that wasn't my thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, it was a nice way to kind of get out of that perfectionism.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, when I'm creating something that's my thing, it's never really done.
Good enough. Never good enough.
Yeah, it's never good enough. So I'm constantly, and to a fault. I mean, there were times when I couldn't even really get anywhere with a new project because I would just keep shooting myself in the foot by being too perfectionistic. I've gotten better about that, certainly. And I've crossed over into this realm of now really wanting things to be excellent.
Right.
And realizing at some point you just have to put the baby to bed and realize it has to be done. But with working with you guys on your music, I obviously still could invest myself in a very obsessive kind of way. Yeah. But at the same time, at the end of the day, it's like, well, it's not my voice on this recording. Right. It's not my drums on this recording.
But did you ever want to Paul McCartney it and sneak in the studio and play the drum track or something?
No, not at that point. Okay. No, but I imagine at a different point in my life, I probably
really
would.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you say, you're a skilled bass player too. I'm sure there were bass parts where you were like, I wouldn't have played that there, or maybe that could be cleaner. You know what I mean? That's probably tough for you to struggle with your perfectionism to someone else's project, like you say.
Well, it was a challenge, not because of anything that you guys were doing, or obviously I loved the music and I loved you guys, and I thought you were very talented, especially as vocalists. Having both you and Jared being able to sing the way that you did in harmony, that was a new thing. You guys were like trained musical theater singers, or were like perfectly on key. They were I was A-Bing tracks, and there's like, these are all exactly the same. Yeah. What I was dealing with at that point was that anything that I was going to do was going to pale in comparison to my experience with Maroon 5. Not just because of the success, but because it was such a meaningful experience for me. We knew we were doing something special. Right. We knew that we were onto something and that we had a real chemistry and connection. But in retrospect, I was able to, once I wasn't in that anymore, I was able to recognize, wow, that was really a unique experience.
Right.
That like 99.99% of people, artists or otherwise, get to experience in life. And it was just hard not to think like nothing is ever going to be that magical. And then of course on top of that, they're out there still having #1 hits at that time. And so it's like, here's me working in someone's garage on this garage band.
Yeah.
No matter how magical and fun and wonderful and inspiring it was tough to make that comparison every day in my mind and not have it kind of like, well, what's wrong with me that I can't be doing this?
Right.
You know?
But I would imagine too, for you, I mean, it's sort of it's like you were weaning yourself off rock and roll. You know what I mean? Like you were in the biggest band in the world, and then you were, well, I'm not going to go cold turkey on music. I'm going to produce this little band, and if something happens of it, maybe I'll be as successful as a producer as I was as a drummer. You know, it's like it's like being California sober, right? You still smoke a little pot. You're still there, like, and maybe you needed to go cold turkey or something at that point. But from my standpoint, at least, your contributions were invaluable, both musically and your experience as a touring musician, as a recording musician, all the things that we couldn't know because we'd never done them before. You know, just for context, this band was 2007 to 2012. We were in a band for about 5 years, and Ryan was a part of it for most of it. He helped produce kind of early demos. Then we decided we were going to give it a shot and spend some money and do like a 5 or 6 song EP. We did that. Started working on them at your home studio. We ended up doing 2 or 3 albums, shorter albums, but
that's true.
It was a lot. It was a long collaboration.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that, I talk about now. I mean, it's been over 10 years since I was in that band. I still have CDs, talk about how old we are. I still have, tracks that I play for my son. And I go, this is Dad. Like, listen, you hear that? You hear that harmony? No, they didn't let me sing lead, but I was singing the harmony. Like, it's cool. And it's such a great memory and such a great experience. And you're a big part of that because it wasn't just 5 schmucks or 4 schmucks. I don't know how many schmucks we were. We were a lot of schmucks doing this all ourselves. We were 5 schmucks with one guru leading us who had experience, who had knowledge, who had ability. And you made us 50% better. And I think the tracks and the albums and the experience all reflect that. So thank you.
50%, just 50%.
Just 50%. Yeah, it wasn't 100% better.
Guru. Okay, Guru. I like the sound of that.
You can add that to the suffix at the end. I'm Ryan Dusick, got the original drummer, and Guru.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say, and it was helpful to feel like I was doing something purposeful. You know, that I feeling like I had something to offer because my self-esteem was pretty low at that point. And in retrospect, you guys were offering me a lot in that regard. As much as I may have been offering you in terms of just the experience that I'd had making records and stuff, allowing me into your creative space in that way and to have that sense of purpose in having that. Because I wasn't really creating a lot for myself at that point. And so I also, it's the camaraderie. We talked about community and having a tribe. That definitely served that purpose for me during those years too.
We talk about that a lot today in our interview.
Perfect segue.
Yeah, that's right. Doc Maillard, segue master.
Well, this is going to be, we've actually already recorded this, so we know what it's going to be. Right. And this is really a great conversation with Aleksei Archer, who is an actress, a creator. She's a writer, a comedian, and we're going to touch on it in a minute, so I don't want to ruin it too much, but she covers some heavy stuff with a sense of humor, and she's kind of a jack of all trades, doing a lot of different stuff and doing advocacy work. Yeah. And she started a nonprofit. And so it's really consistent with the kind of stuff that we're doing, but also just tonally and the kind of sense of humor that she has. I'm really pleased with what this episode's going to be.
Yeah, me too. I think, like you say, we're sort of trying to thread the needle here with this podcast, in you being have a clinical perspective, and me having, as we've said, the schmuck perspective, where I get to just make funny comments. But being able to live in that space is hopefully entertaining for our listeners and for us. And I think that that Aleksei is the perfect guest to do that. Because like you say, she is a stand-up, she's a comedic actress, and she kind of tries to walk that line herself. So
like you say.
Yeah. Like you say, shut up.
I was just telling Duck before we started.
We all have some vocal crutches that we fall back upon. And I apparently say, as you say.
That's his new
my
middle name.
I'm going to work on that.
Brian Duck, like
as you say.
As you say.
I did want to ask you a question.
Yes.
Right now, you're not paying me to do this. So if I'm going to do this, I want to get something out of it. So I was thinking that I could get a little free therapy each week as we do these. So perhaps like a little 5-minute session here. I wanted to ask you about, because it's something that actually comes up in this conversation with Aleksei, about sometimes when we're upset or we are we have a problem, and we share that information with our loved ones or friends, whatever. And sometimes it's frustrating because they're trying to solve that problem for you. And you find yourself saying, I don't want you to fix this. I just want to complain. And I just want you to hear me, and I want you to listen. There are times when I, as an actor, there are times, and it's increasing in recent years because, you know, like any other profession, you want to constantly ascend the ladder. And my profession is sort of unique in that you can be on top of the world one day. You can be Steve Guttenberg in 1988, where you're the king. And now, don't get me wrong, I love Steve Guttenberg, and I just ran into him at a film screening a couple of months ago, and he was awesome. But Steve Guttenberg isn't, you know, they're not knocking down Steve Guttenberg's door now, and that sucks. Yeah. There's a part of me that wants someone to tell me, you're a utility guy. You come off the bench. You're never going to be the starting shortstop, to extend the sports metaphor. Like, I sometimes I hate it when I go, I can't get a job. I've auditioned and I don't book anything. And people go, you're so talented. You're so great. You're going to be a big star one day. And I'm like, I'm not. Like, the track record shows. I've been doing this for 25 years. I am who I am. And I need to be okay with that. I need to be okay with being the guy that gets one day on Law and Order, gets shot in the head in the first scene, and then I'm done. What is that? Why is it that there's a part of me that wants someone to tell me like that it's okay to not be a superstar? I want someone to tell me, you're not that good. Does that make sense? You know what I mean?
Are you looking for permission to let go of a dream? Is that essentially what you're
Maybe. Especially now in my mid 40s, like when I know I talk about them all the time, my damn kid, but I've got a kid and I've got a future to think about that isn't mine. And I think there is a part of me that goes, I've been doing this for 25 years and a lot of my friends quit after 7 years and I kept going. And it was like, oh, Duck's successful. I wish I had the career Duck had. And don't get me wrong. I am so grateful and I am humble. And I know that I have had the success that 99% of my friends and other actors wish they had. That being said, there is a part of me that goes, but if this is all it's going to be, I don't want to do this way for 50 years. I want to take the next step and be a series regular on a TV show or be in movies regularly. And if I'm not going to do that, I need someone else to say, yeah, if you're not getting those jobs, there's probably a reason and it's okay for you to quit. You know, maybe. I'm not saying that's it, but that could be a part of it. You know what I mean? Like somebody giving me permission because I've persevered for so long and I've succeeded for so long that now to give up, it's like, well, what was it all for? What was it worth if you're just going to give up after 25 years instead of after 7 years? You know?
Yeah, well, I went through something similar, I think.
No, it's not about you. This is my therapy.
Well, this is different than therapy for me in that I get to start a sentence with, well, it's similar for me.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think for me, just, you know, I did hang on to music after it was clear that it was never going to be what it had been at one point for me. And so I did have to come to that place of acceptance. It's like, there's not going to be another Maroon 5 for me.
Right.
And that was a place I had to come to myself. I guess my question for you is like, who could have that voice? Like who, if they said that to you, would it give you the resonance that you're looking for?
You know, to be honest, I crave that from my wife. I want my wife to be the one to be honest, and bless her heart, she supports me and she believes in me so much that she'll never say that. And I don't really want her to, but there's a part of me that like when I'm complaining to my wife, when we say, do you want me to fix the problem or you just want to listen? Sometimes I want her to be like, yeah, I get it. Maybe this is all you're going to be. Maybe that is the cap of your skill set. You know what I mean?
So then think very honestly about this question. If tomorrow she came to you and she said that, you didn't prompt her or anything. She just said,
you know, Doug,
you know what, Doug?
You're not very good.
Brian, we need to talk. Brian, you're never going to be. You're never going to be what everyone says you're going to be. Well, how would you respond to that? I mean, think about that, honestly. Yeah. How would you respond to it?
I think I would almost laugh because I'd be taken aback, you know. Also, if you know my wife, she wouldn't be that tender about it. She'd be pretty blunt. She'd be like, it ain't happening. You know, my wife says it like it is.
Staten Island,
right? It comes out. Yeah, that's a good counterpoint. I wouldn't like that. I wouldn't want to hear that. I think it's more in those moments when I'm down on myself and I'm feeling like I was up for a job this weekend and I didn't get it. Yeah. And now I'm like, did the audition really well. I got a call back. I was excited about it. And then I got pinned for it, which in the industry means like you're one of the top 2 or 3 choices. They pin your picture on the board. And then it turns out I didn't get it. And I go, what was it all for? You know, what was all that effort and all that stress and all that anxiety that I go, I really did good work. You know, and some people say the working actor's job is the audition. It's not the day on the set. You've already done your job if you got pinned, if you got the call back, but it still doesn't feel good to not get the job, you know? And so it's in those moments, it's not just out of the blue where I would want her to be like, you know, that thing you were saying 2 months ago, you're right. You suck. You're not good at it. But it's in those moments when I'm feeling down and I'm complaining that I almost want someone to be like, yeah, you're right. I get it. You know, like someone just to confirm my own self-deprecating.
So if that happened, then how would that affect how you're going to move forward? I mean, would you then take that as, okay, it's time to change the course of how I'm going after things, or would it just be emotionally?
I think it would just be emotional, because I think if that decision were ever going to be made, it would come down to me. I mean, certainly I'd involve my wife, because it would be like, well, we have to figure out what we're going to do with our careers and our lives. But eventually, essentially, it would still have to come down to me. So I think it's more of just a soothing, you know, like I almost want someone to tell me that I'm right in my, like I said, my own kind of assessment of my skill level. And in some days I might feel if I book a job, then certainly that wasn't accurate. I still do have it, you know, but in those moments I find myself wanting someone, my wife, I think, to say, yeah, I get it. You're right. You've never been the lead on a TV show. You've only been the number 7 on the call sheet, you know, and maybe that's your cap. And okay, so now what are you going to do with that? Which is probably how it would end up. I'd probably come back around and they go, yeah, you're right. It's still a good living and I'm still proud of myself and I still got to do it.
Well, maybe there's a role play that you guys can do. Maybe
she can just talk down to me and really degrade me. And
it doesn't. Yeah. Well, that took a little bit of a sexual turn there.
Doesn't everything with me eventually? Wait till you hear this conversation with Aleksei.
Oh yeah, and another
great segue.
You are the king.
Sorry, blew out the mics.
Yeah, so I imagine this is probably going to be something we do regularly, where you come to me with something you need to
get off my chest.
Yeah, and I think it's good for people to see. You know, therapy is a conversation. People have this idea in their mind that, you know, therapy is some kind of thing that is scary.
Right.
It's like you're just having a conversation, really, and hopefully with somebody that has a bit
of an informed opinion on it that can.
Yeah, but also that can be understanding,
right?
Compassionate, can just ask you questions and reflect what it is that is going on. That's healing in and of itself, is to have just that sounding board, because the people in your life sometimes mean well, but they don't understand the right way to do that. Anyway, we're going to continue to do that. I have a feeling for today, we have this incredible conversation we want to share with you. Aleksei Archer, I think you're going to enjoy it. Anything else you want to share before we...
This is what we've been shooting for with the Harder to Breathe podcast, and I think that we nailed it. I think we nailed it.
All right.
You be the judge.
Without further ado, our conversation with Aleksei Archer. Aleksei Archer.
Yes.
Welcome to the Harder to Breathe podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. How are you doing?
I'm well. Yeah. Ran around a bit today, but I'm happy to be sitting here getting the chance to have the conversation with you guys.
You can relax now.
Yeah.
The conversation.
Oh, wow.
I like how you put "the" in front of it. We were introduced, 2 weeks ago at the Hollywood and Mind Summit, something like that, very recently. And you were introduced to me as someone who's creating content that is suicide loss with humor and a little bit sexy.
Yeah.
Explain this to me, because that sounds like a really delicate line to walk.
Something I tried to do, but I just couldn't pull it off. So
you're doing it right now.
Thank you.
Are you kidding me? Wow, stop it.
I'll move.
Yes, I need some space.
Yeah.
No, I don't. Come closer.
Okay.
So my brand always has been to empower women to step into their sexuality. I think a large part of sexuality is also humor, feeling that freedom to say and do the things that you want to when you want to, and to step into our feminine energy. And that has always been my brand. And then I had a hugely traumatic situation happen, which we'll get into later. And I decided that I really needed to also focus on mental health. Well, I guess I'll tell you what it is.
Okay. Go right into
Here
it.
it comes.
Sorry. It's hard to have the conversation sometimes because I am attempting to have a very palatable conversation about suicide loss. And that can be challenging because of how intensely triggering it can be. But I lost my father to suicide 7 years ago, and the anniversary was 2 weeks, around the week that we met. When that happened, I realized that there was a huge community of people who have lost someone to suicide, and I felt that we really needed an advocate. And so I was like called upon by the universe to start having the conversation. And so it's been my goal to bring sexy comedy, or to make mental health sexy and cool for maybe the first time in history. So this is my attempt at doing that.
Well, there have been a lot of very sexy people in history, artists or otherwise, who have struggled with their mental health.
That's for
So it's not exactly like those things haven't overlapped before. You're just actually making content that is pointing this fact out for the first time, which is amazing. And I took a look at all the stuff you've been working on online, and the thing that stuck out to me, just recently you posted something that said that 4 years ago you started this nonprofit, Mourning Glory, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get into that. But in this thing you posted, you said, I've been mourning for 7 years, and I started Mourning Glory 4 years ago. So I have been actively grieving for 4 years. So what is the difference in your mind between the 3 years before and the last 4 years? What is active grieving?
I love that question.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you so much for checking out my work. When my father died, I was obviously in complete shock. Well, that's not necessarily obvious. Some people do sort of have like a heads up, but generally it is extremely shocking. We, meaning me and my family, friends, were not aware that my father was actively suicidal. I found that I was all of a sudden in this group of people, which I didn't know existed, which are suicide loss survivors. I kind of fell victim to stigma. I was getting rejected on dates because I started to do what I like to refer to as unhealthy healing modalities.
Sure.
I was drinking and partying and Tindering, looking for love in all the wrong places. But what I found was that I was also being rejected in some cases because I was going through this intense loss. Mm-hmm. And so I started to not talk about it. My dad had even suggested in one of his suicide notes that we could make up another story, that we didn't need to tell people that he died by suicide, but I didn't want to live my life as a lie. I actually met a guy who had lost his brother to suicide. And it was the first person I had ever met who had had a similar type of a loss. And we fell in love and had a very intense relationship but I realized that he and his family were really a victim because they hadn't really done any of the work. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that we were going to do healing together, but that was not at all the situation. So when I left that relationship, I was really struggling. This was in 2019. I saw the Suicide Prevention Center in huge letters on Olympic Boulevard. I don't know if you've seen that building. Yeah.
Is that Dee Hirsch?
Yes,
yeah, okay.
exactly. Mm-hmm. So I contacted them and they connected me with the bereavement sector. Mm-hmm. And they were incredible. I mean, I didn't even know that I was bereaved, but they were so helpful. I couldn't bereave it.
Oh. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That's our show.
And the drummer.
You caught me off guard with that one.
Sorry, I just have to break the tension a little bit.
Hopefully there's not tension. I think.
No. I'm creating it.
Good.
I don't.
I'm glad you feel it. I'm glad you feel it because it's been awkward since you walked in.
Sorry, that's kind of the effect that I have on people.
Yeah, no,
no big deal. They were very, very helpful though. And so I started going to group, and I went to my very first group, and I walked into a room of suicide loss survivors, and they were all telling their stories. And after coming out of a relationship with someone who really wasn't talking about his loss, would shut me down when I would talk about my father, it was literally like walking into a room of my superheroes. Mm-hmm. And I knew from that very first meeting that like my life was different now. Mm-hmm. Like these people were going to mean the world to me. Yeah. And I knew that from like the first day.
What a moment.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And then I went to my first group and I cried the whole time. And I found 2 other groups. So I was going to 3 groups a week. It really became a large part of my life. And I started collecting all of these survivor friends. I was working on creating a documentary about the benefits of group therapy. So then Mourning Glory sort of happened because I threw a birthday party for my dad in January of 2020. And I got all of my survivor friends together. We were doing community games. And I got a big cake that said Happy Death Day to Daddy. And I was like, this could be a great idea for a documentary. And then COVID lockdown ended up happening a few months later, so we stopped shooting. But at that point, I already had mental health professionals that I was working with, and so we transferred over onto Zoom, and so now we've been doing a weekly meeting every week for the last 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's kind of how Mourning Glory started.
Amazing. It sounds like you and I have more in common than I would have first thought, because I'm sober. I've been in recovery for it's going to be 8 years. And
congratulations.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
And I imagine, obviously, getting sober from being an alcoholic and grieving the loss of your father are 2 totally different things. However, community and peer support and the connection that you so badly need when you're going through something so devastating and vulnerable as you are in that moment, walking into that room for the first time. Do you think, the sense that I get is that everyone would benefit from that, whatever they're going through? Like, we think that we're an island, right, that we can get through things.
It's a theme that we've seen come up. I mean, we've talked about it, that just this craving for community, right, regardless of trauma or suffering, just as human beings, we crave it. As actors, we're very solitary creatures. We do a day on set, we meet people, we think they're going to be best friends, and we never hear from them again. Peace. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's not just trauma that breeds that desire. It's just that human nature of like, I want my tribe. You know what I mean? Whatever that may be.
Absolutely. I like to call it the C word. All of the C words, but especially community is my favorite one. No matter what you're going through, no matter how dark, there are other people that are going through a similar experience. And if you can find your tribe, then you won't have to feel alone, because you're not. And I think being alone is very, very dangerous, and it leads to silence, and silence is deadly. Yeah. So that's one of my biggest markers, is to really encourage people to find other people who have gone through similar experiences, which mine was a happenstance. I called the Suicide Prevention Center, looking for resources, and had no idea that they had a free group. That's also part of my mission, is to let people know that there are services available, and that maybe there is a group and you can find your brethren, or your sisterhood.
It's one of the few benefits of the internet. There aren't many, but that people have been, I mean, we can find like-minded people anywhere in the world. Yeah. If you've got a hobby, there's someone else in the world who enjoys it, and you'll be able to find them. So
absolutely.
Way to go, internet.
Yay.
That's 1 in the win column.
I still think, though, getting into the actual room with other human beings as opposed to being on a screen, when possible, is preferable.
I like hiding behind my keyboard, Ryan.
And that's okay with me, but yeah, that's why we do most of our interviews online, is so that we just don't have to
so I don't have
breathe
to face
each other's
people.
stench.
No, I agree with that. It's been an interesting transition. I've even been trying to transition us back into in-persons. That being said, I think sometimes for newer people, it might be easier for them to like hop in on a computer, especially if they're going through like deep depression. That's
absolutely.
Like debilitating. Yeah. Deep grieving, which also can be debilitating. That there is an upside to it. But of course, being in person, being able to hug each other, it's the best. So
I actually started as a therapist during the pandemic online on that computer. The first clients I had were all on Zoom. And that's a weird way to become a therapist in the middle of a pandemic with people on Zoom. And it was a very strange time in history too, to be.
Anxiety levels at an all-time high in the world, right?
And then we went into in-person, and it was like a whole other thing of anxiety because we all had masks on and we're in the room together and the person's sitting close. It feels when you've been in quarantine for 2 years and then all of a sudden you have a person with a mask on right in front of you talking about their deepest, darkest secrets. It's very vulnerable. And then the mask came off. And then it was
then the masks came off, right?
No,
you know what I'm saying?
That felt even more vulnerable. You notice how much is, the nonverbal communication. The facial expressions and things. I think as human beings are evolved to read each other in that way.
Sure.
Of course.
To sort of get a sense, not just in what people are saying, but how they're communicating it with their body. And there's so much more that you can read from a human being when you're in the same room with them. But being online and being able to be with people in that moment was life-saving for a lot of people. So it is absolutely a benefit especially for the types of people you're talking about. If you can't get yourself into a room and go to therapy or go to a group support kind of environment, that's a great first step, is to jump online, get that support that you need. And that could be the stepping stone that gets you even further into the help that you need.
Yeah, absolutely. There were a lot of people that showed up to group in person those months before lockdown, and it'd be their first time, but it'd be like, I've actually driven here like 3 or 4 times, and this is the first time I actually like walked in the building. It can definitely be, what do they call that? Like, when you smoke pot,
a gateway meeting.
Yeah.
Then you get into the really heavy, hardcore meetings.
Zoom is the new age gateway drug.
Okay, so I'm curious. You said that you had some not so healthy ways of coping or grieving until you found this community. So what are you doing actively now? Are you in therapy yourself? What is grieving and or just working on yourself and growing look like today?
Yeah. So yes, I am in one-on-one therapy with an amazing therapist who I absolutely adore. And then I also co-facilitate group meetings, which I also get to be a client myself because my group, we're all pretty advanced at this point in terms of our grieving pathway. And then I do co-facilitate alongside a mental health professional. So we hold space for each other, which is really cool. Going to therapy, hosting groups, helping other people has been a large part of my remedy. And forgiving myself, forgiving my father, forgiving my mother, forgiving everybody for their sort of like participation in what has sort of happened with the family. My family has completely fallen apart since my father's suicide. And it's been, they call it secondary losses. You know, losing my dad, who was my best friend and my cheerleader, was kind of like the cherry on top. But then there's the whipped cream and then the ice cream and then there's like all the other pieces. And, you know, the fallout of what's happened to my life has been really catastrophic in a lot of ways. But on the flip side, I might be a better person in some ways because I've had to overcome, you know, one of the worst human experiences. And I think, you know, sometimes what we do with our pain can maybe make the world a better place. That being said, I am in no way advocating suicide.
Brave stance.
I think the problem with suicide, especially when you lose a parent, it can make it feel like it's an answer to a problem, but it's not. Suicide is the problem. And the ripple effect of what happens to people in their loss it's an atrocity to mankind.
I do actually know something about that myself. My family has been affected by suicide. I wasn't
sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wasn't aware of it until I was about 16 because it happened before I was born. But I am keenly aware of how much it affected my life, even though I'd never met my grandmother.
Your grandmother?
My grandmother.
Wow.
So my dad, who, well, if you met my whole family when I was growing up, it's just like the most fun-loving, happy, loving family. And on the surface,
Sure, rub it in.
I know, seriously.
well, this is going somewhere, guys. This is going somewhere. Most people's like external view, we were just like the perfect family. And I described my childhood in that way in a lot of ways. But you peel back the layers of the onion and you start to realize what's going on with some of these people and the trauma that is being passed down. And that's a big part of my understanding of the problems that I've had in my life. It wasn't that I had overt abuse in my life. It wasn't that my parents weren't wonderful people or that there was addiction. It was that the coping mechanisms that they had to use to get through their traumas and their losses were things that they passed down to me. And I don't blame them for that. It's just, we all have traumas that get passed down. But for my dad, the way that it manifested was he lost his dad when he was in his early 20s. Heart attack, unexpected. He was like 54. And then his mom went into a deep depression after that. And I think she was already depressed before that, but they tried everything. They took her to the hospital. She got hooked on Valium. She eventually took her own life. I didn't know that until I was like 16 years old when my dad told me that. And what I've come to understand is that for him, that loss, he internalized as I didn't do enough. Oh. I could have done more to save her. After my dad died, I could have been there more for my mom. And so the effect that that's had on him and his personality is that he just wants to take care of everyone. He's like over involved, to the point, it's very loving, but it's to the point where he doesn't know where that line is. It's a codependent kind of thing. It's like his self-worth is very much wrapped up in being the caretaker of everyone that he cares about in his life. The way that affected me, first of all, my control issues, he has heavy control issues. He passed that down to me. And because he was so caring and so involved in a lot of ways, that kind of stunted me from taking care of myself. I just could depend on my parents to do that for me. And so it's been decades to kind of realize that's how it played out. And I'm still learning and understanding because, again, I wasn't there when it happened, but I understand how it affects families. So for you, this is still pretty new. I mean, it's only been 7 years. Every challenge we face is an opportunity to build resilience and overcome something, but sometimes we just can't handle it and it overcomes us. So how are you working through all of that?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. First, wait, what's your dad's name?
Kenny.
Kenny. Okay. Before we move forward, you have to let Kenny know that I am available for adoption. So,
you joke, but he was like a band father for my band that Ryan was producing the album for. So like Kenny he'd take you on.
He's also an attorney. So like he's like everyone in my family and probably the band too gets like free legal services.
I think he did my will.
I love this. I would say that overall, I am in a pretty good place because I'm not living my life in guilt. And I think that like just hearing your father's story and the amount of stigma that was around when he was our age or, growing up with a mother who had died by suicide was something that like nobody talked about. So that would have been something that he would have been carrying, which I'm deeply empathetic for that experience. I mean, gosh, what a different time. And we still have so much further to go than even where we're at now. So guilt, regret, and shame have been my markers for the healing. Like I don't feel regret or shame or guilt associated with my father's suicide anymore. And that was in large part because the moment he passed, I knew that what I needed to do was to find a way to accept it, because it wasn't going to go away. And that if I kept trying to fight against it and kept trying to, barter for that experience of being a daddy's girl, which I still am, that it would have been a never ending struggle. Not to say that I don't still struggle. I do have my ups and downs. At this point, I would say that my trauma responses are almost like inside of like my nervous system. And I think that my father's suicide was one thing, COVID was another thing, the strikes as an actor was another thing. My best friend was murdered. My cousin drowned in a freak accident, who was like my brother, who was the only person I knew when I moved to LA. So it's been a lot of big things. As much as in my mind, I know that I'm safe and I am capable, feeling like I could get involved in a friendship or a relationship and get left or abandoned still lives inside of my body. And so that's the next piece for me in terms of my healing pathway.
Let me check with you on something. I was telling you a vulnerable story. I wasn't really cognizant of the language that I was using.
I wanted to ask you about this.
Did I say died by suicide or did I say commit suicide?
You said died by. You did not say commit. I would have called you out on it.
Okay, good. Well, I just wanted to make a point of that because I know that that's important. And you make a point of that on your website. You talk about the language that is helpful language and language that is not helpful.
I think this is, as a lay person, this is something that was really informative and really fascinating to me because it's not something that we talk about, like you say, and it's also not something you want to think about. But yeah, of course, there are ways that the language affects the way we talk about it. So yeah, please, our listeners, I think, would be fascinated to learn about this.
Well, you are the one who's in the middle of this right now. Is there information on this that you'd like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, in the mental well-being space, are trying to eradicate the word committed when referring to a suicide, because that means that the person committed a crime, like they would have like committing arson or burglary or theft. So sometimes I think people think that it's like committing to something, but that isn't actually, it's committing a crime because suicide used to be illegal, which is kind of silly. Yeah. I mean, I guess the intent behind it was to deter people from taking their life. So that's why we try to not say committed. You could say died by their own hand, died by suicide, suicided as an actual verb. So yeah, people tend to cringe when they hear, like, you know, if you're in the know of committed suicide, but it's not a good way to describe passing away.
That's something I wanted to jump back to a little bit.
Yeah,
the humor, because I think I'm a funny guy. I use humor in a similar way. Not only to diffuse tension, but to sort of let your audience, the person in front of you, whomever, know that I'm cool. I'm cool talking about this. You don't have to walk on eggshells, you know? And I think a lot of that comes from you talking about letting go of that guilt, letting go of that anger, blame, shame, whatever you would have towards your father, and saying, I can joke about this because I don't harbor deep-seated anger or hatred or resentment about that act. Do you think that the humor is for you, sort of telling yourself it's okay, I can joke about this, or is it for the people you're talking to let them off the hook of being like, you don't have to be nervous, you don't have to walk on eggshells, I can joke about this, we can be open about this? Probably a combination of both, right?
Are you sure you're not a therapist, Duck?
Well,
God, I'm in a therapist sandwich. Wouldn't be my first time.
That's extra content you have to pay for with
that's the
Patreon.
sexy part.
That's on my OnlyFans.
Right, there we go. Hot therapist, non-therapist action.
It's a whole subgenre.
No, here we go. Bring it back.
So that is a really good question. Who is the humor for? Mm-hmm. You know, there is a part of me that is trying, there's a part of me that's trying to use like my God-given talent, which is really how I survive. I don't know if it was God-given, to be honest. It's how I survived childhood. Right. My father was really funny. My mom is extremely witty. She's still witty even now that she's going through like very early dementia. And I grew up in a house of brothers. So and everybody was funny. In order to like actually survive, I had to be witty and on my toes, right? And I grew up in Manhattan in New York City, so there was that whole element as well. I really think that humor creates a palatable environment for any kind of conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think suicide loss or suicide is probably one of the most difficult things to talk about. It's really challenging for a number of reasons. I mean, most people have had some version of suicidal ideation. or at this point with the amount of suicides that are happening in the world, have either known someone or at least maybe were a fan of someone who has died by suicide. So it gets to be this really complicated and really dark thing. And it is really dark. So if I can find some way to shed some light on the darkest experience that I've ever had, then I feel like I'm doing a service. I don't think it's an accident that I am literally the most, like, I'm up there in terms of, like, I cross off every single box in terms of diversity. Mm-hmm. I'm female, I'm Black, I'm bi, and I've done comedy, and then that I had this, like, incredible relationship with my father. I feel like, again, like, the universe kind of, like, this was meant to be my story.
Yeah.
And I feel like I would be doing a disservice to the world to not share that and to become an advocate. It was like, there's no other way for this to happen.
Right.
Like, I have to do this.
It's not a coincidence that comedians are forged in trauma. And, you know, that's how I'll put myself in that group, even though I'm not a stand-up. But, that's how we learn to deal with that trauma and that difficulty. For me, it was being bullied and things growing up. And if I could make them laugh long enough for me to run away, that was my out. You know what I mean? So, and I'm okay with it. It's okay. I'm cool now.
Yeah.
They don't bully me anymore.
Yeah.
Except my son. He bullies me. The kid's a monster. But yeah, I don't think it's, like you say, a coincidence that comes from a place of that suffering. It's a way we deal with it, in a way that we kind of cushion that blow.
Absolutely.
And how great that something can come from it, not just entertainment wise, but the good that you're doing with, all the work that you do.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And I'm sorry to hear that you were bullied.
I appreciate it.
No,
you talked about the stuff that happened with your father, and, the trauma that affects 2 generations ago gets passed on to them, and then it comes on to us. And I used to think that it was lessening. Like every generation gets a little less, hopefully a little less racist, a little, like we talk about our grandparents and the casual racism that was thrown around. But I think it might be the opposite, in that, like, there's this pressure that builds up from your grandfather and that passes on to your parents. And then and hopefully when it gets to us, if that pressure builds up too much and it explodes, we get it out and we reset the bar to 0. We say, I'm not going to pass that on to my kid.
Yeah.
So he's prepared for, hopefully my son is prepared for, the bullies of the world, or the trauma of the world that I didn't have the language or the skills to deal with. And I hope I can prepare him. I mean, I probably won't. Our kids are always going to have to go through something. But, I think there is a notion that we learn from our past. We learn from bad examples as well as good. And hopefully we all get a little bit better once that dam breaks and we learn language, we learn skills, we learn ways to overcome that, so we don't pass it on to the next generation.
Well, I think part of the reason why things get passed down the way they do, why trauma can be intergenerational, like I said earlier, it's the coping mechanisms that get passed down, not the actual trauma. And so what happens is, we all are familiar with the phenomenon. We usually end up either being the opposite of one of our parents or exactly like one of our parents. I think our tendency in trying to deal with difficult things sometimes is to overcorrect to the opposite extreme. So we either make the same mistakes, we have a parent who is an addict and we become an addict, or we become
a teatotaler.
Like you compensated to another extreme. He's never had a drink in his life.
Oh, wow.
Which is wonderful.
Not true. I've had a drink, but breaking news.
No.
It's a very clean distinction that I always wanted to make, that I'm not like anti-alcohol.
Okay.
I never drank. I've never been drunk. I never used drugs because my father was an alcoholic. And so just clarification's sake, but the point is still there.
So what happens is it can be wonderful to be the opposite. If there was something you saw as a problem, to be the opposite, to be the best version on the other extreme. But in some ways, you're still not in balance, right? You're going to another extreme of behavior, of living, where, for instance, if a very selfish person, like a narcissistic parent, raises a kid and learns from that, like, my needs don't matter, it's my parents' needs matter more than mine, then they go to the opposite extreme of making everyone else's needs matter more than theirs, because they don't want to be like their parent who was so self-involved. And then what happens is that they end up losing themselves, and then they have problems that they then pass down to their kids because they're not taking care of their own needs. So breaking the cycle is about recognizing there's balance in the middle of these extremes. It's not a choice between either the very worst or the very best. It's we're all human beings. We all have stuff that gets passed down to us, and we have to sort through it. There's no easy fix. It's processing the trauma. It's finding ways of coping with it so that we're not overcorrecting in that way and then causing a whole other problem.
Right. But finding the balance. It's definitely hack to life.
Right.
Sure.
If we can strike it.
I noticed that you identified that biracial, bisexual. It says that on your website as well. Why is that important to lay out as part of your platform, who you are and what you do?
Advertising, right? You can just find...
No, I'm just curious. Everyone is identifying these days. It's like when people come into my office, a lot of times, especially young people, they'll have like 5 diagnoses and they'll say they have gender dysphoria, they're ADHD, they pansexual, and they'll tell me like list off these identities. And I'm like, wow, you have a lot of self-awareness. And I'm curious as to like, is that empowering? Is that like a thing that comes from a place of like, this is who I am and I want to stand on that stage or...
That is a good question. So yes, I am a cisgender bisexual woman who is omni-curious.
Okay.
So I say that all to say, if you're human, there's a chance.
Okay. Send your resumes.
How important that is to my identity. I mean, listen, I feel very lucky. I feel very blessed. Like, I do think that we are living in a world where sexism is still alive and well. And I think it's so ingrained in our culture, even in American culture, that we almost don't even notice or see that it's happening. It's been an interesting journey being an actress and being mixed race and seeing what sort of like happened in Hollywood, over the years in terms of Black and white and mixed and ethnically ambiguous, and where does that all sort of like shake out? But I feel very confident. I feel very comfortable in my skin. I just feel like it is important for people to know that that I am an advocate and that I do come from this sort of diverse background, and that maybe in that people can find more of a connection to me. But really it's a basis for connection, and I don't feel bad for myself.
Yeah. But like you say, I think it's a lot like the humor thing in that you're letting people know it's okay to talk about this, letting people know that you're open to whoever you are as a human. I mean, I think it goes a long way to putting other people at ease.
I mean, I was just telling you guys my Tinder profile. I'm just trying to get the message out there.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll put the link up in the description.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, it's really sweet.
I know what I'm doing. I actually have a question about that. If we can take a left turn for a second.
Yeah.
Please.
How do you feel about married guys? No.
That's not the first time I've heard that this week.
Good. No. We're both big social media people. You have 1 million followers. I'm around 450.
Wow.
But I think, it's similar. We both have to churn out content. When we talk about stress and anxiety on this podcast, is that something that causes you anxiety? Like, I have to put out a video today. I have to create content. I'm constantly having to think about how can I put this out there in a way that doesn't seem exploitative or you know what I mean, or just feel cringy, but I have to do this. We see people filming TikToks and things, and you go, ugh. You see them in the middle of the street, like, get out of the street. but also, it's maybe that's just me, the old man. Get off my lawn. But it's your job. I mean, you have a big following. You have people who love the message that you send, and they want us to keep up with you, and you have a certain responsibility to keep that output coming. Is that something that weighs on you every day, that you feel stressed, like, oh, I really don't feel like doing this?
Yeah, I mean, beyond that, I really don't appreciate you kicking me off the lawn the other day.
You know what? The sprinklers were going, and my dog needed to go to the bathroom.
I loved the sprinklers. I thought it was great.
I know you did. There was a very like White Snake video moment. I wish you weren't on the roof of my car though, because you dented it up.
I was washing it.
Yeah. You have to wear heels while you're washing.
Right? Stiletto right down the middle. Damn it.
Yes, there is a pressure with the social media stuff, and it's very annoying. I would say that probably the most difficult part for me is figuring out how I'm going to continue getting my message out there while still retaining people to actually want to stay engaged with the material. Because obviously there's like my fan base who just wants to see me being sexy and coming out of a hot tub. And then there's other people who want to hear about like mental well-being and be encouraged and feel inspired. So finding...
And then there's the crossover who want to see you do both at the same time.
Oh, Doc, you're too kind.
I know how things work.
So striking that balance is really important. I sometimes will do, even though when you do a post, you're supposed to like keep, engaging or whatever. Sometimes I'll do a post and then I won't look for a little while and then check back in and, but for the most part, I get a lot of love.
So that's why you didn't respond to my comments.
Yeah.
Because you don't look at...
I didn't see it.
That's fine.
I'm sorry.
It's fine.
Is it Ducky?
I have a couple of different accounts. Anyway.
That is a challenge for me. I mean, social media is something I struggle with on a daily basis because it's like, I know that is the way you reach people today. I have to come to a place of acceptance about that, especially having things out in the world, putting a book out in the world, having a podcast. But I didn't grow up with social media, and so just the very fact that like being at an event like the one we were at when we met, I'm like so engaged with that environment, and I love meeting people, and I need to be present to do that. And I become keenly aware when people start pulling out their phones that everyone is kind of checking out and going to that place of, well, how does my light look? And,
100%.
And for me, that's a challenge because I know that I have to do it to a certain extent. And if I want to grow a following, because I have something to say, I want to have an audience that it's like, I could be yelling into an empty room and, it's like, what's the point of that? So if I want to have an impact, then I have to engage in the way that people engage. But at the same time, it's like, I don't really take pleasure in it. And I do feel like there's something lost in the process. You seem to be striking a pretty good balance because you're making it personal for yourself. You're doing something that's meaningful to you and you're engaging with your audience. But for me, like getting in front of one of these cameras and just talking to it is not the same as being with human beings and speaking with them. So I don't know if you can relate to that at all, but that's just something I'm struggling with right now.
No, I absolutely relate to that. I mean, social media is a really interesting topic, and it's like, it's for better and for worse. It's created a platform for people to have whatever conversation they want, but then it also can be a place where people start to compare themselves to other people, and people are editing their photos and making their life look a certain way, and it's very easy to manipulate the optics of your life utilizing social media, and so that can be a dangerous place. I'm hoping that we're getting to a place where people know that, and so and that the messaging is that we are all unique and special and important and all have important things to say, and fundamentally I feel like that's something that I probably want to bring into my message even more. It's just knowing that like we are unique, special, and important people, each and every one of us, and we all are making this world what it is, and everybody's important, and we all need to be here and stay here and, find ways to empower our own selves and find community and things like that. But yeah, social media, it's become a sort of necessary evil. Yeah. And I definitely have a love-hate relationship with it. I'll say that much.
Well, that's good for me to hear because you're successful at it. I am not yet, but you were going to say something, Doug.
I was going to say it isn't a new concept in terms of the necessary evils of whatever we do. I look around and I see the Beatles here, and it makes me think of they stopped touring in 67 because they were like, you can't hear us anyway. People are screaming. And yet they still are putting out music and they still need people to buy their albums. So it's like there's still that you still have to play the game a little bit if you want your art, your message, whatever, to get out there, even if it feels distasteful. You know what I mean? So it's again, that word balance of like, you do what you got to do to get your message out there and what's more important. You know what I mean?
Well, I think also I'm trying to adapt my thinking on it from thinking of it as a necessary evil to just, it's not evil or good by nature. It's just a tool.
Yeah.
It's true.
It can be used for evil and has, and it's affecting people very negatively. I mean, I see people that are growing up with social media, and it certainly is causing a great increase in anxiety, depression, suicidality.
Let me tell you about the text threads that 10-year-olds have. In my son is beginning. It's still in a controlled environment, but like there's the Roblox game where they all play, and then there's a chat window on the side.
Right.
We went out for dinner the other night. We came home. We were gone for 45 minutes. 250 messages. Just gif. Oh, you were stupid. You are stupid. And you're like, all right, pump the brakes. He's 10, but it's coming. Like I think about it all the time with my son. You know what I mean? So
what a wild world.
What a
yeah,
world.
my best friend's son, who's like my nephew, he's 7. He's obsessed with Roblox.
Yeah, no, it only gets worse.
I bought him the Roblox that are actually the physical toys, so we put those together.
All right.
So I didn't see the chat rooms.
Okay.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. You can just get a pad and paper and you do a physical chat room with him.
Yeah.
You start writing down comments and then he writes one.
It
takes longer, but
yeah, sounds great. He's actually a really good little painter. So
nice.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just think it's a challenge for all of us it's like be part of the solution. It's like, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. We create these things. We don't recognize when we create them, the kind of problems that they can bring until they're causing those problems. Again, it's not that it's inherently that way. It's just that it's a powerful tool that is affecting people. And now we need to correct for that. We need to find ways to make it. I don't know. I mean, if I were having a kid, I don't envy you the position of raising a kid in this environment.
We talked about, he's going to be in 5th grade this next year. And we're like, all right, maybe when he finishes 5th grade, we talked about the phone. And now I think it's 8th grade. I think it's changing. We're like, we'll give him a watch so we can keep track of him or something. But I don't want that world. I don't want those thoughts creeping their way into his brain of people, of him. I don't even care about him finding things on the internet. We're open. We'll talk to him about sex, things like that. But I'm talking about the negative thoughts and the negative energy of other people trying to fire that onto him. He doesn't need that. He needs positivity. He needs people pumping him up until he's old enough to put himself down and feel bad about himself. And that's what we all do as adults.
This is a really sad story. I don't even know if I should say it. I'm going to say
it. Say it.
A 10-year-old took his life.
I saw that story.
Yeah, from bullying. And he was physically bullied in school and then was harassed on Snapchat. The number of 10-year-olds who are taking their lives now is just like out of this world.
Yeah.
And I think about when I was 10 and, there was just no, I mean, even when my father passed, like it was not even on my radar to even like think about somebody doing something like that.
Right. It's just one more reason why what you're doing is important, because I think there needs to be that out there as well for kids to find, for people to stumble onto. It isn't just stupid Roblox conversations. It's, hey, it's okay to have these feelings. Maybe my son hopefully would feel comfortable talking to me about that, but maybe kids who wouldn't would be able to find resources and find access to things and say, I'm feeling this way. I don't know how to process. I don't know what it means. Hey, here's someone who can help me with it.
Yeah.
So it's a credit to you and people like you in your community who are saying this is vital. This is necessary. And so bravo to you and to you.
Thank you, Doc.
So suicide loss is the focus of Mourning Glory and your advocacy, but your website says that you are certified in suicide prevention as well. Is that a part of the advocacy work that you're doing? Or?
I felt like because they're so peripheral and then I end up kind of in situations where people are talking to me about their own suicidal ideation, that it was important for me to get that certification. That being said, for example, D.D. Hirsch's Suicide Prevention Center, their focus is on suicide prevention. And then they just have a very small part of their business is in suicide loss survivorship. And so as a survivor of suicide loss, I felt like creating a 501c3 that was just focused on that would be my niche. Okay. I think eventually Mourning Glory, spelled Mourn, will service grieving for many different types of loss. I've just really wanted to focus my specialty on suicide loss, since that's where I was coming from and that's where I felt like the need was.
And tell people where they can find, Mourning Glory. And
yeah, it's mourningglory.com. Mourn. Yeah. And then we're also, all of our links are through there. But yeah, mourningglory.com.
So what would you want people to know about grief that is not commonly known? For me, I identify with the grieving process, not because I've been fortunate enough not to have lost anyone very close to me in my life yet. We all do at some point, However, I went through a grieving process that was the loss of my identity, my first career as a musician. And in a lot of ways, I identified with the stages of grief. I went through all of the anger and the depression and the bargaining. And eventually I found acceptance, and that started this journey of recovery. And I know that there's different models of it now. It's not necessarily the Kubler-Ross of 5 stages. It's not as linear as that always. In your experience, like what you've gone through, what you work with people with Mourning Glory, what would be a key takeaway in terms of what people's understanding of grief and what people go through in grieving?
I mean, community and connection have really been my solace. Mm-hmm. Finding other people who have gone through a similar experience, knowing that I'm not alone, really has kept me grounded. Knowing that it's like having a sponsor. Mm-hmm. I have a group of people that I can call at any time of day and talk about my loss who will understand it. I've found that there are, some connections in the 12 steps in AA with the grieving process.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I guess I can't really understate the meaning and importance of finding other people who you can rely on. And they might not be the people that you would expect. I think that I thought that maybe my mother would have been the person that I would lean on because we were the only 2 girls and we were so close to my dad. But I've really been more of a space for her to lean on, which I feel very good. I'm proud of that. But it was very tricky, especially in the first couple of years, trying to figure out like who's leaning on who here, who's the parent in this situation. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like I want to have a safe place to come to, and realizing that like, okay, I love my mom. We now have a very good friendship. But she's not necessarily my go-to person when I'm feeling down. She's, come a long way, and she's done a lot of her own healing. She's been a member of Mourning Glory, which has been a wonderful, wonderful treat to be able to have her and to have a group of survivors sort of cocoon around her when she comes and visits us. And because we're on Zoom, she's able to join from the East Coast. Sometimes the people that you think should be your people to lean on might not have the capacity that we would hope for. Mm-hmm. And to not give up and to keep digging and finding cherry picking those people that can be there for you. Mm-hmm. And they may not be the obvious choice.
It took me, in terms of finding the 12-step community, it took me, I don't know how many meetings I went to before I found my people. The people that I connected with, that I felt like I can see myself in them and I feel like I'm one of them. Mm-hmm. Because I went to meetings where it was like, I couldn't relate to the stories of people who were using drugs that I had never even been in contact with, crystal meth, and stories of stealing cars to support their habit and stuff like that. That just wasn't my reality. Not that I'm not knocking anyone who's going through overcoming that life. I'm just saying, like, for me, I needed to feel like I'm in a room with people that this is my experience and I connect with this, and these are the people and it was just like finding alcoholics who were like normal people that were like really struggling with like, how do I deal with this and keep my family together? Mm-hmm. How do I go back to work? How do I have a career as a sober person? Just like the normal everyday stuff. And in grief, life doesn't end. You have to walk in through life carrying the burden of this incredibly painful thing and figure out how to live. And it's through the other people that are going through the same thing.
Well, I will say too, is like, know your unhealthy healing modalities. Like, I know when it's approaching my dad's birthday or his death anniversary or Father's Day that I'm probably going to do some of the dumb shit that I like to do. So I like to drink, and then I like to go on Tinder. Okay. Not good healing modalities, right? Mm-hmm. So I know that when I'm approaching those weekends or so I know when I'm approaching those days, I'm going to reach out to friends, make plans, and center myself around people who can look out for me. So that means whether I decide to drink or play it sober, that like I'm creating safety zones for myself, and have somebody take my phone away.
You know, to be able to turn the camera on yourself, pun intended, and say like, I can't be trusted with this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's brave.
Thank you. Knowing your unhealthy healing modalities, and I call them still healing modalities because we're all trying to figure it out and there's no like good or bad, right? Like, you know, if I get fucked up and go home with a rando, like maybe that is what I needed to do that night. Or a married guy, you know? But to at least make an effort to not wake up hungover sad the next day would be nice, right?
Yeah.
That, and then also eventually in time, as I'm going through my healing process, to replace unhealthy healing modalities with perceivably more healthy ones.
Sure.
Like going on maybe a spiritual retreat, or, you know, going on a hike those days.
You couldn't sound less enthusiastic about, it's like, go home with a rando or go on a spiritual fucking retreat.
Oh, man. I mean, listen, whatever it takes.
That's true.
I'm trying the best that I can.
No, it's like I said, it's admirable. I think it's we've talked about it in the past, right? Like for me, and not to make it about me, but when I dealt with anxiety as an actor, I would get on set and suddenly all those feelings would come up. I found if I could just find an AD or another actor and say, hey, listen, I struggle with anxiety sometimes. So if you see me a little twitchy, that's why. It took care of it.
That's
just because
amazing.
I shared that, I let someone else in on it, so I didn't have to hide it, you know? And so I think it's the same world. You saying to your friends, hey, the anniversary of my father's death is coming up. Just speaking it into existence takes the power away from it.
Yeah.
Other people are aware of it. Your community is there to support you. And that goes such a long way to healing and towards making healthier choices. You know what I mean? So
I mean, I love what you just said, though. So I shot a half-hour dark comedy loosely based on my true story. And I knew that it was going to be triggering material because the show takes place around the patriarch taking his life. And so we had a therapist, a guru, and a shaman on set. And that was so that we were creating a mentally healthful environment on set. So cast or crew would have, you know, space and place to talk to somebody if they were being triggered by the materials.
Yeah.
And I really think that the future of entertainment can also include a focus on mental well-being, because as actors, as creators, I think it's really important, especially if we have to use our stuff
Right.
to get the work done, that we're also being taken care of and that we're also creating an environment where we're taking care of each other.
Right. And then the intimacy coordinators on sets goes towards that, you know, making people feel more comfortable with possibly very uncomfortable moments, you know, things that people have to deal with as actors. We shouldn't have to keep that inside and be like, I don't want to say anything because I don't want to get fired.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah, definitely.
So you're having conversations about suicide and suicide loss in the things that you're creating, which is admirable work and a difficult thing to do, as we've covered, walking that line. How do you suggest people have these conversations in their own lives, in their families, when people are struggling either with suicidality or with loss? how do you have, I mean, it's a difficult thing. A lot of people just
not everyone's as funny as you. Is what he's saying. They might not be able to crack jokes.
Well, I mean, do you ask someone, do you recommend that you ask someone in your life that you think is struggling if they're having suicidal thoughts?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there is a massive misnomer that if you're thinking that someone's suicidal and you ask them if they are, that then you're giving them that idea.
Right.
That is statistically not true at all.
Right.
Basically, if somebody's already thinking about suicide and they're having suicidal ideation, they've already thought about it on their own. Right. So if you suspect that somebody is suicidal, ask them, are you having suicidal ideation? If they say yes, you say, do you have a plan? And if they say yes, do you have the means? Basically, have you started sort of getting the things that you would require in order to attempt? If you get those three questions, if you get all yeses, then it's time to sort of pass them to the 988 number is incredible. Those people are literal angels who are volunteers who are very skilled at helping people with suicidal ideation, because at that point it would be out of most civilians' hands, right? But it is really, really, really important that if you suspect somebody to be suicidal, if you just ask them straight up, and then you get the opportunity to have that conversation. Of course, not everybody's going to feel comfortable doing that, but it's a good start. And know that the 988 number is there and that the resources are incredible. And what they've done at D.D. Hirsch is just absolutely amazing. Yeah.
Well, the other thing that happens, because I run into that working at the clinic that I do, the Missing Piece Center for Anxiety. It's a high level, high need kind of clientele that we have. And so we deal with suicidal ideation on a daily basis. And when I started working there, I was, as a therapist, the first thing you're like, somebody's going to tell me that they're having suicidal thoughts. Like, what am I going to do with that? And your first instinct, of course, like most people, is like, I don't want to go there. It's like, that's too heavy. But the reality is, not only do you need to go there as a clinician to get that information, it might save their life, but you're not putting the idea in their head, but also you're offering them a gift.
Yeah.
Because chances are, if they have been thinking about it, they've been bottling it up, they haven't shared it with anyone, and this is maybe the first time that it's a safe space for them to say out loud something they've been carrying with them.
Yeah.
And that can be that alone can be a moment of feeling seen and understood, where something that's been like overwhelming and burdening all of a sudden isn't so.
Releasing,
and so the chance releasing is the release valve. And so I really do think that even, just friends in your life, family members, asking that question is a gift to them. It's an opportunity for somebody. I say this a lot when I'm speaking on stage, when people ask, like, how do I help someone in my life that I see is struggling? And everyone has this instinct of, like, you want to do something to fix it. You want to take care of them in some way. And the reality is, like, you can't fix somebody. They have to be able to take care of themselves. But what you can offer them is empathy.
Yeah.
Right? You can ask them questions. You can show them that you're listening and that you understand. Just reflective listening, saying back to them exactly what they just told you. That's probably more than they've received in terms of kindness and compassion if they're struggling with what they're struggling with. And so just being present, just being able to be a witness to what it is that they're carrying with them is the greatest gift that you can give them.
That's also a key to it, not just suicide discussions, but especially like a marriage. When there's a big like release of, I'm very frustrated about this, it's very helpful to say, is this something where you want me to help you solve this problem, or you just wanted me to listen to this problem?
Best husband ever.
Right, as he asked the woman about dating married men. Best husband ever.
No, that
just a joke, honey. Just a joke.
That is amazing, guys. You are totally. I'm like, you guys are just like so impressive, because I'm not trying to say anything. I just think that people tend to want to solve problems. a lot of times when I'm complaining about something, I don't actually need anybody else to solve my problem. I'm probably going to solve it myself.
Just want to bitch.
Exactly. I just want to bitch and moan and have somebody say, yes, I hear you. And maybe I even understand. Whoa, you know, without like having to fix something. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I did regret earlier in my grieving process was not asking my father if he was suicidal. He did have a first attempt, which he lied and said that he was attacked. But there was a little bit of question about it being a suicide attempt. But I was too scared because I was like,
how old were you?
I'm not telling you that.
No. How old were you?
You're going to do math and then you're going to figure out how old I am.
Okay.
Oh, you were doing so well, Duck.
How much do you weigh?
100. I was an adult.
Okay.
But you want to know what's really interesting is that, you know, I never had daddy issues. And then as a full-blown grown-up, I got to have them. So that's been an interesting transition. Like, I never felt like I needed to get, like, approval from men because my father was such a strong force in my life. You know, I actually have become fiercely independent, which, you know, I did rely on I sort of did have a bit of a codependent relationship with my father. You know, he filled so much of my life. He was my advisor and my best friend and the person that he knew like all of my deepest, darkest secrets. He kind of filled this immense amount of space that kind of also made me not have to be as independent because I could rely on him for anything. And, you know, filling that void for myself has been, you know, probably of great benefit to the person that I've actually become. That being said, I wouldn't wish suicide on my worst enemy. I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy to lose somebody to suicide. It is a horrible, horrible, horrible experience. And I've had to fight tooth and nail to try to put some semblance of a human being back together again, you know, post loss. So here I am.
Did you have any clue that he was suffering before the first time that no?
No, you know, hindsight is 2020, right? At his funeral, I met one of his friends, and he had told me that my dad told him that he was depressed. My father was born in Northern Ireland and went to boarding school at the ripe young age of 8 in England. And so, you know, he was away from his parents, and he was very isolated, and it was a really difficult time for him. I also believe that he was abused by priests, and that was also something that I never asked him about, but I did ask my mother about after he passed. And he wasn't really, you know, he kept his emotions pretty close to the vest. He was very loving. He always told me he loved me. He always hugged me. But my dad wasn't, he was the opposite of a victim. You know, he was never, ever spoke from a victim position. In fact, he was an incredible fighter. He would write letters to the Better Business Bureau on a weekly basis just to like start fights with the government. He was an atheist and anti-disestablishment.
Oh,
so he was
worked
like
that word into a sentence. That's awesome. Anti-disestablishmentarianism.
Yes. He was
so
really
I had a nickel for every.
And he was really into anti-disestablishmentarianism. I think I said that correctly. So the show that I created is a half-hour dark comedy loosely based on my true story. With the sudden loss of her father, an opera singer is set on unexpected adventures to take over the secret family business, which is to become the new drug kingpin of Venice Beach. And this show is called Venice Beach Scumbags. I'm a trained opera singer, so basically it's my journey from, private school educated daddy's girl into the underworld of drug dealing after my dad sends me these suicide notes to take care of the family. And it's an interesting parable for my life, because in some ways I do want to become the savior of my family, because my dad was such an incredible patriarch. I purchased a golf cart. It is
the most important part in making a TV show is making sure you have the golf cart to drive around.
Well, first I shot the pilot, and then I purchased a neon green golf cart, because everything is neon yellow and neon green is their theme colors. Yes. I drive this golf cart around Venice. Venice Beach Scumbags is our crew. And a scumbag is a good person who sometimes has to do the wrong things for the right reasons. So we're taking the word scumbag
like
back.
Batman.
Yes, exactly. Or Robin Hood. And so that show really, I think, is probably one of the best representations of what I'm doing in the world, which is to have the opportunity to show the fallout of what happens to a family from the point of view of a suicide loss survivor, and to put it in a really entertaining container so that it's palatable for people to see what that experience is like. Venice Beach Scumbags. And then Venice Beach Scumbags, in theory, would then create a waterfall of suicide loss survivors that would then be supported by Mourning Glory. And Mourning Glory will be then creating more services for people who are in grief, specifically suicide loss. And so that was sort of the way I've sort of planned to build things out and to utilize the skills that I have to make the world a better place.
It's like the multi-level marketing of healing.
It's my pyramid scheme of grief.
Mental health.
Yeah.
So you mentioned mourningglory.com. Where else can people find you, your amazing IG account, etc.?
Yeah, you can also find me at Aleksei Archer, Aleksei Archer. It's the Russian boy spelling. So on paper, I look like a Russian English boy, but I'm not.
In person, you don't.
Yeah, really?
You don't look like a Russian boy.
Talk about representing a lot of different demographics.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah.
Okay.
I'm very active on Instagram, so you guys can easily find me. And AlekseiArcher.com is also my website, and everything sort of leads to the other. So
awesome. It's been an absolute pleasure, Aleksei, to have you on the show. The balance we're trying to strike on the show between humor and serious stuff, it's a lot easier when there's somebody who
lives in that place. Yeah, it's right in your wheelhouse, I think. So.
No, I've really loved having this conversation with you guys today. I can't thank you enough for the opportunity to be able to show up as my authentic self. Mm-hmm. I feel like we need more spaces and places like this. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this was a really great way to have a really difficult conversation, and I couldn't have done it without the therapist sandwich.
That's the goal, right?
And I'm going to go tell all my friends. They're going to be really jealous.
Tell them we've got plenty of openings. Wait a minute. And on that note, this has been
another spin-off, The Therapist Sandwich. We have the Dusick and Duck Show radio program.
Starring Aleksei Archer.
I think it's a three-piece.
It's got legs.
They bought it in the room.
6 of them.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this was a lot of fun. Aleksei Archer, thank you very much for being on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Thank you guys for listening as usual, and see you next time on the Harder to Breathe podcast.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.